Salutations, respected viewers. So it is Victory Day. Now, in Western Europe, that's the 8th of May. But if you're in the former Soviet Union, that's the 9th of May. Why? Why this discrepancy? Well, in Germany, in 1945, the German High Command signed the Instrument of Surrender on the 8th of May, 1945. It was almost midnight, but that was the wee hours of the 9th of May, Moscow time, which is why the erstwhile Soviet Union marks the occasion on the 9th of May. So it is a huge deal in the former Soviet Union, particularly Russia, Belarus, a few of the others. In Azerbaijan, it is a public holiday, not such a big deal because they don't wish to distract from their own day of the Azerbaijani armed forces, which is in late June. So there'll be huge parades on the 9th of May, and you can see the very first one, which took place in August 1945. There's some of that on YouTube, parading on Red Square in Moscow, and many Soviet cities will also have a parade, obviously on a much lesser scale. So it's a moment of triumph, and one can't deny Russians and other former Soviet peoples their right to celebrate such a resounding victory. Moreover, it was bought at such a dear price. So many millions of people were killed in this. Soviet people, at least 24 million Soviet people were killed. It might be considerably higher. Not just military personnel, but a huge number of civilians were also killed. So they suffered horrifically. They suffered really beyond description. And so they think it was something worthwhile. I mean, well, who can dispute that? So you can see the footage from the original celebration, and it shows that banner after banner of various Wehrmacht regiments being thrown at Stalin's feet, and as the voiceover says, like before the feet of Tsar Alexander I. And who was among the foreign dignitaries there to mark the occasion in 1945 but General Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, yes, the future president. Of course, very shortly after this, the Cold War began, and having been to the Soviet Union, having been at all chummy with the Soviets, was a real black mark against somebody's name. But somehow Eisenhower, Republican, a passionate anti-communist, wasn't tarred with being feeble on the Reds. So the parade starts every morning, around about 10 o'clock in the morning, and there's the big clock on the Kremlin wall overlooking Red Square strikes the vital hour, and the parade kicks off. And there's some soldiers in their dress uniform. They do their high kicks, marching, and the tune of the Sacred War blasts out. So the Sacred War was composed in June 1941, just after Germany attacked within days, and it had its first rendition at Belaruski Station in Moscow as troops entrained and went off to fight the Germans in the West. So at the beginning of the parade, the defense minister will be there in the civilian suit, in a car, standing upright, and his car and the commander of Moscow military district, their cars will drive towards each other and stop, facing each other, and that's that. I don't know how they managed not to fall over when it stops. Obviously, they're not going too fast, and one of them got something to hold on to just below camera level. So it's all in traditional fashion. There's a very set protocol for how it takes place. Obviously, the president of Russia, he gives a speech lauding the valor of these fallen warriors and so on, and reminding people to live up to the fine ideals and the courage of their forebears and so forth. You'll see many people, civilians, wearing orange and black ribbons, which is a symbol of Russian national defense, or that of other former Soviet republics. The orange and black ones, they go back to the Patriotic War. That's when the French invaded in 1812. And obviously the 1941 to 45 war is the Great Patriotic War. Strictly speaking, it's the Great Fatherland War. But in English, the Great Patriotic War is a better rendition. So all over Russia, you'll see red flags, plain red, no symbol on them. Alluding to this, of course, when the Soviet Union existed, the field of the Soviet flag was red, had the hammer, the sickle, the five-pointed hollow star in the ensign of the flag. But this will be a plain red flag. So that was that. Obviously, red is a colour of emergency and not just the colour of communism. So it'll be a somber occasion at moments, but also be a moment of recalling this famous victory that echoes down the centuries. And afterwards, there'll be a more upbeat mood. There'll be some up-tempo tunes played. There'll be Katyusha, for example, as in Yekaterina is a very common woman's name in Russia, and Katyusha is one of the familiar forms thereof. And it came out, I think, just before the Second World War began in the former Soviet Union, about some woman called Katyusha gathering pears and apples and calling to her husband across the river and so on. So there will be a very upbeat mood as well. So yes, almost every family lost at least one relative, but they've got to enjoy their lives and also remember it as a time for revelry. When the Second World War broke out, the Soviet Union had got a new anthem. It had used the Internationale, but a new anthem mentioned the name of Stalin, but not too explicit of the communist ideology, as it wasn't universally popular. So in other Soviet lands, it's marked to a lesser degree. It's hard to overstate the Second World War as shaping the psyche of Russia and to some degree the other former Soviet republics. So in other years, in important years like the 60th anniversary, the 70th anniversary, former Allied countries are asked to parade. Of course, Russia's relations with some of these former Allied countries are not that cordial these days. So will they be invited to parade next year, which is the 70th anniversary? We shall see. But otherwise, India, China, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, and so on have been asked to parade, as well as most former Soviet republics. Israel was asked to parade. Of course, Israel didn't exist as such in the Second World War, but all right, there were Jewish resistance fighters all over who fought, and when Israel was founded, some former Allied soldiers from various countries would then move to Israel, were in the Israeli Defense Forces. So there we are. So it's perhaps the most magnificent and the largest scale parade around, and that's that. It's a deeply imposing sight, seeing all these thousands of people marching in unison. There are plenty of tanks, there's a fly past, there's a tricolour display. When the planes, they let out these special streams of coloured smoke right over Red Square, so huge numbers of civilians will be there. And then afterwards, people are just marching in the streets, remembering the immortal regiment, as they call it, meaning just ordinary people, soldiers, sailors, airmen, who fought in the war, whether they died, whether they survived, and holding a portrait of their loved one, and he or she did their bit for their Soviet motherland. And President Putin is walking amongst the crowds, and you'll see a wide shot of hundreds of people, and he'll be in there as an everyman. He's the head of state, but he's also an ordinary citizen, and he too had his parents who did their bit in the war. He had two elder brothers who perished as children in the war. Obviously, he was born in 1952, some years after the war, the only surviving child, and all the more adored for the fact that he was the only one to live to adulthood. So there we are. That's what Victory Day is like in Russia and some of the other erstwhile Soviet republics. In France, it's a public holiday. In most Western European countries, I don't think it is a public holiday. Certainly in the United Kingdom, it's not. So it's extraordinarily important in Russia, and there's a very visible military presence. And obviously, people in Russia take national security exceptionally seriously, precisely because when their security was imperiled, when they were invaded, so many millions of their people were killed. So they never, ever want to run the risk of that happening again. And they often feel that the enormous sacrifices they made are not sufficiently appreciated by Western countries, who will give themselves a pat on the back more than they should do, who don't face up to the fact that really the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the Wehrmacht's assault, and the Soviet Union bought victory at a very high blood price, and this is largely overlooked, de-emphasized and diminished by Occidentals who are excessively self-congratulatory in relation to the Second World War. And on this issue, I think Russian public opinion is broadly correct.